Good afternoon. I'm Roger Clayman. I'm the Executive Director of the Long Island Federation of Labor. I want to welcome all of you to this workshop that is called Building a Robust, Equitable Offshore Wind Industry in the United States. We have a very distinguished and experienced panel joining us to explore this question from a couple of angles. But I think we've learned that in order to build this robust and equitable offshore wind industry in the United States, we are all going to have to come together in our communities to work together, and in the various sectors of our labor movement working together to build a better industry. And as Climate Jobs has said, that to build back better, because we are looking at offshore wind as a way to put us back on track from the economic destruction we've seen because of the virus. It's a very important aspect of that issue. The two issues that we'll be focusing on are, number one, the economic opportunities that come from the new offshore wind industry. And secondly, the question of environmental justice and the link between inequality and climate change. I want to introduce the panel first, and then we will go to a couple of questions that each of our panel members will answer. First, I want to introduce Michael Northrop. He is the Program Director for Sustainable Development and Grant-Making Program at the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, where he focuses on energy and climate change. Previously, he was the Executive Director of Ashoka, an international development organization that supports public sector entrepreneurs. And it was an analyst at First Boston, an investment bank in New York City. He serves on several advisory boards related to climate change and sustainability, and he has been very helpful to the development of Climate Jobs New York. Second is Doreen Harris. Doreen was appointed acting president and CEO of the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority just this year. She has held public and private sector leadership roles, advancing clean energy projects and engineering companies for more than 20 years. She has led the development of New York's offshore wind resource, including execution of the state's offshore wind master plan. And I will say that Doreen is really, if there is an infrastructure to offshore wind, Doreen is certainly a part of that, even if she's not literally picking up a shovel, but the scientific and the thought process behind it. Chris Erikson is the business manager of IBEW Local 3, the largest union in the IBEW with 30,000 active members in New York City, Westchester, and Fairfield counties. He is also the chairman of the IBEW International Executive Council, the third highest office in the national union. He was accepted into the Electrician's Apprentice Program back in 1975 and has held various leadership positions within the local union throughout his career. He has negotiated over 150 collective bargaining agreements, and these agreements are bringing economic security to thousands of members in this area and making a career in those industries that they represent highly sought after. And I will say that I've known Chris for some time, and we met working together because at one time he was focused on the newspaper sector, and we were on a strike together and learned a lot about each other back then. Julia Bovey is the Director of External Affairs for Equinor Wind US and carries out that mission for the development of the Empire Wind Project off New York. After a 15-year career in journalism, she helped advance public support and regulatory policy for New England's first proposed wind projects. She was appointed by President Obama to serve at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to promote renewables and energy efficiency. After Superstorm Sandy, she was appointed the first ever Long Island director of the New York State Department of Public Service. Elizabeth Yeampierre is an internationally recognized Puerto Rican environmental and climate justice leader of African and indigenous ancestry, born and raised in New York. She is co-chair of the Climate Justice Alliance and executive director of UPROSE, Brooklyn's oldest Latino community-based organization. She is a longtime advocate and trailblazer for community organizing around sustainable development, environmental and racial justice, and community-led climate adaptation and resilience. She was the opening speaker at the Obama administration's first White House Forum on Environmental Justice in 2015. And she also spoke at Pope Francis's climate change rally at the National Mall in Washington, D.C. It's quite an impressive group. I want to say by way of introduction that almost 10 years ago, the Long Island Federation of Labor and some environmentalists and government leaders and business leaders got together and started talking about the possibility of producing electricity from windmills out in the ocean. And that's about as what we thought about it at that time. And it's been a long road getting to where we are today. In 2012, October 2012, Hurricane Sandy hit this area, devastating the New Jersey, New York City, and Long Island coasts, and made believers out of a lot of people who may have thought that climate change was not real and it couldn't happen to us. Well, we know very well that it could happen to us. In 2020, coronavirus has put us in an economic situation where we got a much clearer understanding of what inequality is all about, because the impacts were much more harshly felt in communities of color. And so this leads us into a discussion of what the road back will mean for those communities as well as our larger economy. Back in 2014, the Long Island Federation of Labor and the Building Trades negotiated a memorandum of understanding with Deepwater Wind for a project labor agreement for the projects that they would build. And that was some time ago. And now that is now morphed into Ørsted with the merger. And a lot of progress has been made since that time, but it's something we've been engaged in for a while. So I want to start with a round of questions, and I'll start with Michael Northrop. The Rockefeller Brothers Fund promotes global stewardship, encouraging government, business, and civil society to work collaboratively on climate change, acknowledging the moral and ethical consequences of inaction. To fight climate change with these considerations in mind, how can we work effectively on the local level, understanding that this is a global struggle?
Roger, thanks. Good to be with you. And thanks to Climate Jobs New York and the Climate Jobs National Resource Center to put this together. Thanks for having us. It's great to be part of this group. Yeah, I mean, we've been working at the Rockefeller Brothers Fund for about a decade on offshore wind, specifically trying to push it forward in all kinds of ways. And we love the kind of global notion that this is one of the big solutions out there that can generate a huge amount of clean electricity. And we see a lot of countries moving in a direction of trying to start taking advantage of it. Nowhere more than in the North Sea, and the UK is really the leader, but you see plans in China and around Asia and so on, also looking at this. But you know what is so exciting about offshore wind to me is the local side of the equation. I've been so heartened to see the support at the local level from the environmental justice community and from the labor community for offshore wind. And I hand it to Elizabeth and her colleagues at UPROSE and the Environmental Justice Alliance and other colleague organizations. They have done such a great job, pushing for policy support for offshore wind. And, it's just, thank you for that, Elizabeth. And I'm so thrilled to see the support that Climate Jobs New York is putting into this as well. And, all the work you've done, Roger, out on Long Island with Deepwater, now Ørsted, it's just terrific. And, the environmental justice piece is particularly interesting because I think the community in New York has been, advanced in their thinking about climate change for a long time. And, they really embrace the need to go to solutions to climate change because they recognize their own vulnerability and all of our vulnerability to the negative impacts of things like Superstorm Sandy. But they also see the opportunity for job training and livelihoods and, real jobs, high wage jobs of the future. And it's just been this tremendously positive intersection of engagement and interest that has really, helped New York City and New York State both push the offshore wind equation forward. So I think the local piece of the offshore wind story, particularly in New York State, is just a great example for what we can be doing in other parts of the country.
Thank you, Michael. I want to turn to Doreen Harris. Doreen, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act sets ambitious goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions in New York. It is up to NYSERDA, which you head, to propose a plan to the Public Service Commission to implement the law. What is the significance of offshore wind in meeting those goals that are set in the Act?
Yes, and thank you. I'll second Michael's thanks for hosting us today. What a great opportunity to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is offshore wind. And also, in my view, the example that it sets as we look to advance resources, technologies, and policies across the state to achieve the goals of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. I think what we have done collectively and what you'll hear today serves as a blueprint, if you will, for bringing forth resources in a way that is thoughtful, thinks about not only the goal, but also the responsible achievement of that goal in a way that benefits many, many people across New York. And that's what's so exciting for me in working in this resource, and also seeing the day when New York has turbines spinning in the water that we all are working together to achieve. I think it's important to note that Governor Cuomo's climate agenda is indeed an ambitious one, and the offshore wind goals are no different than the broad goals of the CLCPA. 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind has the potential to serve upwards of a third of New York's load in 2035. And I think when we really think about that, that's a game changer, not only from an electricity system perspective, but also from the perspective of the potential that it has for us together. And when you hear from all of us, what you'll see is that we're all pushing on the same goal, which is to bring forth this resource in a way that can be really comprehensive in its approach. And so when we think about the fact that we are bringing forth offshore wind at this scale, what it creates for us in the state is a huge opportunity. And the opportunity is one of economic development, no doubt. We are very, very clear that as the state leading the way in offshore wind, the benefits should come our way. But also consistent with the goals of the CLCPA, that we need benefits to come directly to disadvantaged communities across our state in the form of not only investments but also the benefits that will come from this resource. So what we've done as a state, and specifically at NYSERDA, is we have led the way with planning activities to bring forth these investments. And then also the execution of procurements. We are in the midst of the largest procurements for renewable energy ever by a state. And we use that buying power to bring forth investments that will benefit us broadly. And I know Julia will talk about this, but provisions like prevailing wage, requirements of project labor agreements, investments in ports, clear demonstration of benefits, again, to disadvantaged communities, these are all the goals that we seek together, but I think we as a state have aggregated around this in a way that is comprehensive and I think direction setting for us as a state at large. So thank you. I'm excited to speak more, but I hope that sets the table well.
Thank you, Doreen. Yes, that's an ambitious agenda that gives us a lot to talk about and to work toward. Chris Erikson. Chris, building out 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind in New York is expected to create 10,000 jobs, it's estimated, by 2030. Does your union have a history of supporting projects which contribute to a better environment? And what steps have been taken to be sure that the jobs that are created are family-sustaining union jobs?
Thank you, Roger, and thank you for that question. Certainly, my organization, Local 3, has a long history of supporting projects that contribute to a better environment. And not only the projects that get built themselves, but the relationships with others that have supported the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in the city of New York. Labor network and sustainability, climate jobs, of course, and even supporting the climate march. So those were projects and ongoing projects that are addressing that issue. As far as individual projects, Emerald Cities and the Urban Green Council, which is part of the U.S. Green Buildings Council, and some of their programs. Urban Green was the blueprint for Local Law 97 on the retrofit of buildings. We were involved with them early on. They created GPRO, which is a program of training, which are apprentices in Local 3. Over 1,000 apprentices have completed the GPRO training, which not only gives them the skills for retrofitting and solar installations and such. When your project is built with a workforce that has a GPRO credential, the developer also gets a LEED certification on their building, which is a positive and forward-thinking environmental designation for that building. Additionally, solar training, state-of-the-art training center that our contractors and our industry in New York City committed to. We've had a number of events, including the solar wind industry leaders participate in discussions over there. We're paying attention to that. Another project is the Champlain Hudson Power Express, hydropower from Quebec. Local 3 is supportive of that project early on and continues to be, certainly as the nuclear plant gets shut down and the offshore wind is a little bit away, we're going to need to fill in the gap. So there's going to be other opportunities as well. As far as the steps that we've taken to ensure opportunities for people of color from communities that have been negatively impacted, not given opportunities over the years. I think about the offshore wind, and that's going to take some specialty, a special person that's going to want to go out there into the water. You got to have your sea legs. It's not a 9-to-5 job. People are going to want to do that. There are certain breeds that are going to get out there, and it's not just going to come automatic. And we've offered that opportunity to our members. But I think about the communities where the opportunity is going to be is in the supply chain and in the permanent jobs that are going to be made in the industry that supports the offshore wind, the actual installation. And Local 3 has had relationships with direct entry programs, construction skills, helmets to hard hats, non-traditional employment for women, NYCHA, pathways. These are all programs that have direct entry. And when we take apprentices into our program, the future 40% of the candidates come from these direct entry programs, and that's a significant bite into the future work opportunity. And when I think about the membership in Local 3, and I look at our apprentices and know that 50% are women and people of color, it's a beautiful mosaic, and we're very fortunate to have a union that addresses that, is committed to diversity, committed to the opportunity that this industry is going to bring, and we look forward to working with all of the partners. We got to be a part of it to make sure it happens, and it's my hope that we're going to get there. So thank you, Roger.
Thanks, Chris. Yes, and to Julia. Julia, Equinor is a Norwegian company that has extensive experience building energy resources across the globe, and now is focused on offshore wind, more so as a company. Empire Wind is the first American offshore wind project. What do you think it will take to build an American workforce and supply chain so that the industry can produce permanent jobs here in the United States?
Great question. And first of all, of course, thanks for having me, Roger, and I'm honored to be part of this distinguished group. But the question you ask is really what we have been asking ourselves from day one since Equinor bought the lease area off the coast of New York. And in the early days, when I sat with some of my expert colleagues that have built offshore wind in the North Sea, the way that they looked at it wasn't just, okay, let's take what we've done other places in the world and bring it here. It was a real look at, what is New York great at building? What exists here, and how can we leverage that to build a great project? One of the first conclusions we came to was that we had to figure out a part of the project that could be built in New York. And we're still maturing that option, which would be to build foundations in New York. So, New York has this supply chain to build the new Tappan Zee Bridge, to build the new World Trade Center. It's not that different from the skills that are needed to build offshore wind, whether we're talking about building components in port, assembling them in port. To Chris's point, it's a little bit different once you get out on the water. There are some different skills there, but a lot of what we do is on land. And the question that we're asking ourselves, and I think a lot of the offshore wind industry is, how in this moment in time, when we're talking about Build Back Better, when we're in the midst of the Black Lives Matter movement, how do we make sure that the energy system of the future is built in a new and different way? And how can we make sure that the inequities of the past aren't just reproduced in this new industry? So we've been lucky to be able to contemplate this from the beginning. I don't think it's often in anyone's life that you get to sort of be at the forefront of a brand new industry. I feel so lucky and excited to get to have a teeny role in this. And part of it is making sure that everyone at Equinor is a really good listener. It's part of the culture of the company, something that I've been impressed with. And one of my first meetings I had was, I called up Elizabeth and I said, can I come and talk to you? Because it's the people that have been working in the community for a long time that we need to listen to right off the bat, and then adjust our plans and create our ambitions around the goals these communities have set. And we have been so lucky to have happened upon Sunset Park and South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, and sort of seeing that as a nexus of opportunities for jobs, but also a place where the community has said for decades, we don't want glass condos here. We want industry, and we're more than happy to come into a situation like that. But we've got to keep our ears open, because this is an interesting moment of time. It's about energy, it's about climate, but it is about making sure that we do this in a very, very different way, and have people at the table that haven't been represented before. So what's it going to take? It's going to take billions of dollars and a lot of really hard work, but it's also going to take, I think a different kind of sensitivity and a different kind of appreciation for the role that a project like this has in our greater community.
Thank you, Julia. Okay, so turning to Elizabeth Yeampierre. Elizabeth, how does the use of fossil fuel energy affect our communities, and specifically Black, Indigenous, and people of color? And what are the repercussions to our neighborhoods if we do not address climate change and environmental justice?
Well, thank you for asking that question, Roger, and thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to follow Julia and to hear you centering racial justice in the work that you're doing, which is what everyone should be doing right now. My understanding was that this panel was going to be about environmental justice, and so I want to, before talking, I also, in addition to talking about the problems, which is a legacy of environmental racism, right? The citing of fossil fuel companies, of extractive economies, of polluting industries in communities of color, not only in New York City, but all over the United States, and being able to document the fact that our health disparities are directly related to the proximity to these abuses. So for generations, we've been fighting against the siting of these facilities, but also leading with solutions. Everything from passing legislation that, like the CLCPA, that comes out of frontline leaders. New York Renews is made out of 200 organizations that made that legislation possible. So while we have been envisioning and imagining what the work would look like, we've also been passing legislation and making sure that the funding and the resources are available to operationalize a just transition. Sadly, people always think of us as the people who are victims and the people that and don't see us as leaders. All the resources go to the grass tops to frame the issues for us. And we have conflicts, like we have conflicts with unions, for example, in Sunset Park, where we've got an industrial sector that can be building for climate adaptation, mitigation, and resilience, and can benefit from the CLCPA, can benefit from the Climate Mobilization Act. And if Biden gets elected, from resources that will come from Thrive nationally, and what we are calling a Green New Deal, that would generate about 26,000 climate jobs in Sunset Park. For a community that has over 40% of the community doesn't have a high school degree and could benefit from jobs that pay $60,000 to $70,000 a year. But unions are in the way of that. Even saying hydro, supporting hydro, we think hydro dams are environmental racism. So I want to say that. In terms of offshore wind, really important. We are really excited about it. There are a few problems that I want to flag. We always say that climate solutions cannot become environmental justice problems. And so it's important for us to be able to attract the market so that in the future, we're able to build these things locally and we're not importing the parts from Europe, because these ships, these are diesel ships that will sit on the port and have to be plugged in. They will be spewing co-pollutants and PM 2.5 in the host community while providing energy to a more privileged community. We believe that because we are in a climate crisis that it's necessary to do this and to attract offshore wind and to support it. But in the meantime, we need to start thinking about what the environmental remediation is going to look like. And that's how we address environmental justice when we attract big projects like these, which we think we need right now. Our communities, whether we're talking about Brooklyn, dealing with peaker plants and dealing with waste transfer facilities and dealing with all of that infrastructure, we're the ones that were most impacted by COVID. And it wasn't surprising that that happened because we live in close proximity to all of the toxics and toxicants that have been causing asthma, upper respiratory disease, and other kinds of health disparities. And we have been at the forefront of the solutions. And so it's really important that when people are building for that future, that we are not making the kinds of historical compromises that have slowed us down and that are contributing to the climate crisis that we're in right now. We know, for example, that we need to build with unions. And if you look at all of our platforms and all of our planks, we stand with the workers every single time. Sadly, that relationship has not been reciprocal. And so we hope that from these conversations that we are able to get past that and that folks understand that everything is at stake and that it's all hands on deck and that we're going to have to build just relationships if we're going to have the kind of future that is going to have communities that will not only survive, but will thrive.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Michael, I was going to ask you whether you can say more about the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, why they are so enthusiastic about offshore wind. But I want to add to that, now that you have had a chance to hear the perspectives of the other panelists, whether you see, whether you feel like we as a group are on the right track from the standpoint of, say, the foundation. Do you feel like the mixture of ideas is correct to make this successful?
Well, I'm not going to pass judgment on what everybody in this panel is doing, but I am super optimistic. And I guess I could wrap that with the answer to the question that I was thinking about. But, what is it that excites me, excites the Rockefeller Brothers Fund about offshore wind? I know we're very short on time, so let me say three things. One, I don't think there's a bigger climate solution, economic recovery opportunity than offshore wind in the country today. Just the scale of both of the things that are going to come out of this when we have a mature industry with thousands of megawatts of new offshore wind. It's just a huge, huge opportunity, and it's desperately needed right now. Two, I am so impressed, as I said earlier, again, about the kind of merger of climate solutions and environmental justice interests on this issue. It's just so clear that offshore wind, with certain caveats that Elizabeth brings up, that offshore wind offers just an amazing opportunity to build jobs, build community, and really address this huge, huge existential threat of climate change. And three, I'm thrilled also by the possibility that, labor and environment, broadly speaking, are working together on something. We've had a lot of discussion in the Blue-Green Alliance over a long period of time and have, in my sense, never really gotten very far. And this seems like a place where we have a real chance to work together in a really significant way. And that's incredibly encouraging. So for the sake of time, I'll stop there. But I think those are the things that are really exciting me about offshore wind these days.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
Thanks.
And Doreen, it's clear that NYSERDA will be proposing that there be specific investments made to provide some community benefits. Can you tell us what kinds of commitments will you require the offshore wind developers and utilities to make in order to reach the goals that we've set for that kind of community assistance and opportunity?
Yes, as I mentioned, and as everyone's aware, we had such a significant milestone hit when Governor Cuomo signed the CLCPA in the same day that we announced the results of our first solicitation in July of 2019. And now we're in the midst of our second offshore wind solicitation, as well as a pair of land-based RFPs. And so when you add all of this, there's a lot of buying going on in New York, particularly by NYSERDA and also by our partner, the New York Power Authority. And really, when we look at those RFPs combined, we're looking at over $7 billion in direct investments resulting from those projects that we would award. And to Michael's point, the thousands of jobs that we seek together. And so we, as I said before, we believe we've created the preconditions for New York to benefit from these commitments. But what it comes down to, what it really comes down to, is what we require as a precondition of an award. And Julia can speak to this, but we're very, very clear, not only with the generation companies like Equinor, but this year we also have our RFP for offshore wind with a requirement that the proposers partner with ports across New York. We qualified 11 ports, and specifically we are looking for investments in those ports, sort of the public-private partnership that would bring forth long-term investments in the state, whether it be for the staging of the components, the manufacturing of components or the long-term operations and maintenance, we're looking for that to happen in New York at New York ports. And so when it comes down to it, we're greedy. And we're greedy because we know that if we state our preferences, the industry will respond. And so we state our preferences not only with regard to the alignment with prevailing wage and the negotiation of project labor agreements, but also with regard to the places where we want them to make investments, like in our ports, and the benefits as described that we would anticipate coming to disadvantaged communities as well. And so this all ends up in an agreement, a contract, and that's where the framework for these investments begins. But these are projects that take many years to unfold. There's going to be, it's 2020 now, the projects that we'll probably award this year, you know, it'll probably be 5 years before they reach commercial operation, which means that really what we need to be doing in New York is bringing forth, first of all, the training opportunities that are needed to have the workforce to serve this industry. So we've mobilized over $70 million at NYSERDA to that effect. But also we have a need to begin these investments early so that we can build those components here in New York, you know, that we can benefit in the ways that we're all looking for. So that's the challenge with offshore wind. It is not a quick turnaround. These are infrastructure assets that are long lived. And so we need together to sort of survive the years between now and operation and benefit from those years. And that's really what we believe we have created with the structures we've advanced here at NYSERDA.
Oh, great, thanks, Doreen. And Chris, speaking of the training, which Doreen referred to, how are we in the building trades ready to put people to work in this new industry? Are we going to be prepared, and what does it take? And then how does the way our training programs work, how does that become a benefit to the community? I think you alluded to this in your first answer, that we have an outreach, but how can we get ready to make certain our members and those we recruit will have the skills?
Yeah. You know, Roger, when there was a time that before we signed the PLAs, the building trade signed the project labor agreements with the city in New York, the complaint is that the building trades aren't hiring any people from the community. And the fact of the matter is that we also weren't doing the work with the city of New York. And so the opportunity to hire wasn't there. It was only after the city agreed to the PLA to give us the work did it open up the opportunity to expand the workforce and to include people from those communities that badly needed that opportunity. And we embraced it. And I think it would be the same thing in the offshore wind industry. If we know we have the commitment to the work, like a lot of money they talked about for training was somehow going to the SUNY college system. They want to train, give opportunity to people to become solar technician, offshore wind technician. And again, that's going in a direction that's different than saying, well, this work is going to go to the trades. Usually you come into a program, you're an apprentice, you're going to not only be a wind technician, you're going to be, at the end of the day, an electrician. Same thing with the solar installer. You know, somebody gets locked into a low-wage solar installer job, you know, that's not the end all. Local 3's commitment to the city in regards to solar was that we will bring in people from the communities. And again, they start off at a lower wage. We want to be competitive to keep the cost of solar installations low in order to encourage that to happen. But that person then would morph and move on and become a full-blown journeyman electrician down the road. And $20 an hour solar installer is not a family-sustaining job. And in this industry, again, I know the installers are going to be highly skilled when it comes to the port maintenance and to the manufacturing, again, that is also skilled opportunity and an opportunity for entry-level workers for jobs. But if they're not going to be union jobs, then they're not going to be good family-sustaining jobs. And so having that commitment early on, and the PLA kind of does that, that puts us in a better position to do everything that we can do, broaden the opportunity for the impacted communities that sorely need the jobs. And the building trades have been getting, you know, a bad shot for a long time. You know, they had our pictures on billboards in Times Square, pale, male, stale, you know, and we're not reflective. But the reality is, and that has been proven enough, that the building trades, you know, more than 50% of the members of the building trades are people of color. And they live in, a lot of them live in those communities that we're talking about. Could we do better? We can all do better. And we're committed to that. So we're ready to go. We have the training facilities in place. We have the wherewithal to make it happen. And I just hope that it does.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Roger.
Yeah, Julia, this idea of providing community benefits, I'm just curious whether this is something that's new to Equinor, and in what ways will Equinor try to comply with the Public Service Commission's order to assist communities that have experienced environmental pollution and missed some of the economic opportunities of the past?
One model that I think about is what happened in the UK. You know, they came out strong with big procurements of big amounts of offshore wind, and saw that they weren't getting the types of economic benefits that they had hoped for. And that is something that I know New York looked at when New York said, okay, what are we going to do here to make sure that we do get these associated economic benefits? And, you know, Doreen's absolutely right. Having these clear expectations from the state, which is our customer, and we hope will be our customer for long past when, you know, my kids, I hope, are working in this industry. So what happened in the UK was the UK had to go back and put some real expectations around offshore wind. And Equinor was one of the developers that worked together with the industry to build a port in Hull, and having a great assembly port there. That manufacturing showed up, and now it's a real success story of the industry. And I think it really shows that governments and regulators get what they ask for. We're seeing other states say, we want the lowest price. And if that's what they're asking for right now, they're probably going to get pieces and parts that are shipped from Europe and directly installed. And some states, that's what they want. But New York has really made my job a heck of a lot easier by saying, if you're going to bid here, you're negotiating a PLA. If you're going to bid here, then your bid will be weighed based on the economic benefits they are offering. That will be one factor, as will cost, you know, as will viability. But having these clear and I think shared among us expectations makes a huge difference. One part of offshore wind has, I think, got to be how we're part of this bigger effort. One of the best projects I've ever worked on in my career was what happened at the Port of Long Beach in LA, which was the labor unions, environmental justice, and the environmentalists working together to electrify that port. You know, that's the kind of big thinking I would love for offshore wind to be part of, with all those of us that are at the table here. Port of electrification could do a lot for air quality. You know, we're bringing what we believe is a solution to the marketplace. We don't want to bring problems with it. It's not something we can do on our own. We need a lot of folks at the table for an ambitious project like that. But, you know, in terms of complying, we are also, I mean, I can't say enough about the partners that we have in New York. We hope to use a port where the underlying land is owned by the New York City EDC, Economic Development, and we know that through them we can work with Workforce One so that we can be sure that we have people in the community whose resumes are on our desk. I've been to the IBEW training facility in Long Island City. Incredible, I mean, and seeing those kids there, I mean, kids, they're people of all ages, and what they're learning, and that facility, it's just mind-blowing. I think we've got all the right people at the table to do something like this, but and we've even got a little money coming in, as we've seen lately in the news. So I think we can roll our sleeves up and do this right.
Okay. Yes. So thank you, Julia. And so Elizabeth, you know, it's clear that the developers are making these commitments for benefits, and Doreen will make them do it if they don't. And so in your view, what are the urgent needs that need to be addressed? And how can we work together to realize the solutions and accountability from the perspective of where you sit, looking at the community?
Yeah, I think we need to start talking about this a little differently. And I need to give props to Doreen and NYSERDA, which is really doing some unbelievable, impactful work with EJ leadership. It's a transformation that we think is necessary at this moment, and really excited about offshore wind. But I think we need to talk about this differently. I was born and raised in one of those communities that Chris refers to, and I still live in one of them. And I think that I just remember a story where I was at a Brooklyn Borough President's, and a longshoreman said, I have to share the story. A longshoreman said, we are getting old and we need to replace our workers, and we want to bring in people of color, but we want people who don't have a criminal record. And I remember saying to them, but you've just been indicted under the RICO statutes. So, and I want to say that because it was true. And the idea that the requirements and the hurdles that young people of color, Black, Indigenous, and people of color had to go through to get those entry-level jobs was much higher than it was for management for that particular union. I think that when we are talking about these jobs, we also need to be thinking vertically and horizontally. Who's in management? Who's in leadership? That we give opportunities for the entry-level jobs, absolutely necessary and important. And workforce development also has to be reshaped. Workforce development is very conventional and very traditional, and we're living in unconventional times, and people are thought of in very narrow ways. And so even that, the curricula for something like that needs to be transformed, and there has to be an internal audit of the institutions that are running these things, both unions and managers and businesses, to really look at whether or not their organizations really reflect the composition of the community that they serve and the talent that is actually out there. Because what you have is a state of apartheid within these, where all of the people coming in to learn are people of color, and all of the people that are running these unions and these institutions don't look like them. And so those are opportunities that exist at every level, and we need to make sure that we incorporate those opportunities in there as well. Look at this panel. I'm the only person of color on this panel, and there are some pretty badass people on this panel. They get my respect. But the fact is that the legislation, the infrastructure is being put down by organizations like ours. We just launched the first community-owned solar cooperative in the state of New York. We are doing those kinds of things. And so it is necessary for people not to have deficit-based expectations of people in our communities and think, okay, we are helping these people, we're providing opportunities. No. We are diversifying the workforce because that is what's needed. That's how we address climate change. And our institutions are better and stronger as a result of that. Not we are doing a favor to people who can't help themselves. We are changing because climate change is going to disrupt work. It's going to disrupt social cohesion, and everyone needs to be working with each other in a different kind of way if we are going to survive this. So I would urge for people to start thinking a little differently and not put sort of a 1970s, 1980s patina on what is a different problem that we have today. In the 70s and in the 80s, people were like, okay, let's help these poor people. This is not the way we need to talk about this. Let's engage in transformation, and let's provide jobs at every level for people impacted so that they are the drivers of this economy, and they are not only changing their lives, but they are providing an opportunity to take people out of harm's way in the face of climate change. So I would ask that people start thinking and talking about that differently, and it's hard. These are messy conversations that need to be had. This is a messy situation that we have inherited. So So yeah, we're not just talking about, you know, Tito in the corner in our community. We're also talking about, you know, Juanita who went to engineering school and might not be able to get a job. All of that needs to be on the table, and we need to think about it differently. And if our institutions are not homogenous in terms of their racial and ethnic makeup, they are not keeping up with what climate change is demanding. So I would just offer that. Certainly offshore wind provides us with an opportunity to do something radically different. I was on my way back from Rhode Island recently, 2 weeks ago, when a tornado landed and took the engine out of the Amtrak train that I was running in. A tornado took the engine out in the Northeast. That's what we're living in right now. And so we really need to start working with each other in a way that is fundamentally different than we have in the past.
Now, thank you for that perspective. I think we have a couple of questions from the audience, which is good. We have people who are listening to us. Mariah?
Yes, we do. Let's start off with the first one we have here. We have 3 projects in Australia that need government legislation to move forward. How do you get a conservative government to put aside ideology and move forward for offshore wind?
Oh, us Americans should be great at answering this. Julia?
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone in the panel can answer this, but I mean, the answer is jobs, 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 right? It's there aren't a lot of new things that we can really get out there and roll our sleeves up and build, and we've seen this in several states. And you know, people saw it in Texas under a George W. Bush governorship and presidency. You know, it's that the economic development angle here is honest. It's been realized in other places, and it can be realized here.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Any okay, and you have another one, right, Mariah?
You went a little
Chris,
fast,
do you want to fold into that?
Well, look, I mean, what's happening here in America? Look at our president. What his tie to the oil and gas industry, you know, and the ability to be able to approve or not approve these leases in the offshore wind industry. He's got a lot of control there, and in the United States, I don't know how they do it in Australia, but the only way to change the government is to vote, and we'll see. Come November, let's hope we wake up and it's a new day, and that'll put the, you know, I think would cement the offshore wind industry, at least on the East Coast here in the United States, under a new administration. So, but you got to change the government. They're not going to address your issue, and that's what's got to happen.
I think there's no doubt that Governor Cuomo has been able to function, and NYSERDA has been able to lead on this question despite substantial federal either negligence or opposition. So I mean, there are, I don't know how it works with local government in Australia, but clearly the grassroots nature that we've been talking about of this movement to fight climate change is important, whether government moves or not. I mean, we've built some foundation here for success in the future.
Yeah, that's true, Roger. I would say that the one would expect that there would be widespread for offshore wind across political parties for the reasons that Julia aptly describes. That at least in our view, there is not only the significant economic opportunity, there's also the question of providing resilient support of our power grid. It allows us to diversify our electricity sources in ways that are bipartisan, in my view. However, make no mistake about it, we have been as clear as can be that we are linked with our federal government with regard to the success of this industry. You know, we are relying on the Offshore Winds Bureau of Ocean, or sorry, the Department of Interior's Bureau of Ocean Energy Management for leasing, permitting. All of those processes have been unacceptably slow. and have stalled aspects of projects. And to Chris's point, the leases we so desperately need in the New York Bight. So we have a need here, certainly with regard to that obstacle, addressing that obstacle. We now have expanded obstacles with regard to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and how they are treating renewables like offshore wind and or systems like energy storage in their markets. So I would say we in the U.S. have our own challenges for sure. I would say though, I don't think it has to be that way. I do think that there is clearly a win-win for all with regard to this resource.
And can I add a point?
Sure.
Yeah, I just want to, I want to lift the work that NYSERDA is doing and the New York Clean Energy Industry Report that provides useful data to make the case to invest in clean energy. The reason that that's important is that when we saw this plan to bring the parts from Europe, we were really concerned, and we realized that we are not attracting the supply chain. We are not collecting the data to figure out whether or not there are wind turbines in the United States that we can bring American companies to our industrial waterfronts to get retrofitted so we could build it here and not import the parts. We understand that we are in a place right now historically where that's what we have to do, but we really need to be thinking ahead and thinking about how we attract the market, how we create the market instead of following the market. And I just think that that report does that for us. It's something that we've talked to EDC about doing because we leave ourselves vulnerable when we continually wait for the market to come to us, and we need to be able to promote this vision, and we need to create the market and collect that data. So that report is tremendously important in terms of looking forward, and I just wanted to lift it because it is exactly what organizations like mine that do environmental justice have been asking for a really long time.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, I'll put a shameless plug in. Our data is a little dated in that it's 2018 data. We're wrapping up our 2019 data with a unfortunate COVID update as we speak.
So Mariah, I think we've run out of time. Am I correct?
Yes, it looks like we run out of time, but I've been told by our great tech host that we could possibly take one more question.
Okay. If we're allowed to, because we don't want to quit. What other question do you have, Mariah?
So we have many questions coming in, but I'm going to do a little combination of two of them.
Okay.
In light of the urgency presented by the climate crisis and our mandates of the CLCPA, how do we ensure that offshore wind projects get built in time to meet these deadlines? And in particular, what is the time frame for the Long Island projects moving forward? And what can people do to help promote them?
Okay, so, well, I can think of two people in two squares who are intimately familiar with this. Who would like to go first? Or anybody
I
else?
went first last time. I don't want to be a hog, so please.
No, be a hog. Project schedule is all yours. So
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so there are some headwinds, and Doreen mentioned that there's this delay in federal permitting, and a lot of the projects have permits in, and you can argue that it's political. You can argue that it's just important work that takes a really long time, but it's a real problem. And getting, it's no doubt these projects have to be developed responsibly and with every environmental precaution, but they've got to get permitted and move forward. And I know that Mariah is working with Climate Jobs New York to organize folks in the labor movement to get out there and support New York's goals and support these projects. I think get involved, let your voice be heard, because it's not just, it's not just Equinor, it's not just Ørsted, this is an industry that has so many components, and we've got to get that grassroots support and vote.
No. Roger, I think also you've got the states competing as well. New Jersey made a very aggressive effort and a move within the last couple of weeks, all over the newspapers as well, and further down the coast. And so what each state is. I think that leaves the developers, also with options as to what's it going to be. Is the commitment going to be to one spot, New York, feeding up and down the coast, or is it going to be more than one? There's a real expense to that. We understand that, and so I think within the United States, there is this still open question as to what's the big picture going to look like for the East Coast as well. So I think that's kind of like that's not settled yet, I don't think, and we got a little ways to go with that.
One last comment, even on the Deepwater project where we're so far along, there are still local headwinds, to use Julia's word. And it's still important to put your voices in on that project. And the place maybe where that voice could be best exercised is in Albany in the governor's office. So anyone who has an ability to reach out to the governor in support of Deepwater right now, this is a really good time to do it. And Climate Jobs New York is in a good position to help support that kind of advocacy. So reach out to Mariah and she can help set you up in hopefully some efficient way to get your voice heard. Thanks.
So we're being told that we've run out of time. I want to thank the panel. You've done a terrific job. Thank you for your efforts, doing your homework and your preparation and agreeing to do this. It's very educational. There's going to be a break now, and the next sessions will begin at 4:20. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Roger. Nice job. Good job, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.